I talk to healthcare professionals who were genuinely in fear of their lives. And therefore the lengths that they went to protect their lives and their families' lives. You and I both have a friend where a husband and wife lived in separate homes for that season to protect their families. It was very, very real.
Hello and welcome to the Restore Healthcare Project. I'm Dr. Jennifer Kang. Just want to remind you to like, follow, subscribe, and give us that 5-star review. I'm here today with my friend Paul Manwaring, nurse, church leader, father, one of our favorites on this podcast. And we continue to pound out the details and the nuances of a series that we've called Core Values of Dual Realm Healthcare. Paul, welcome today to the studio.
Thank you very much. Yes, a lot of fun to be back.
And we're back on number 9. We're getting close. We think we're going to have 12 of these. So I'm going to go ahead and read this number 9 core value. We believe that dual realm healthcare functions in collaborative relationships with the local, state, or national authorities to bring health and healing. Health authority, which is shared in mutual submission, is the most effective for sustainable community health. Well, there we go. We've just laid it down, and maybe there's some features of that core value statement that are triggers or are challenging to some of us. So we are going to have a little bit of fun to unpack that a bit. We actually think that government and authority and community health is important to healthcare systems, but that there's also biblical concepts and constructs within which to understand that I think that we bring to the narrative that's really important. And in particular, Paul, what do we think about this mutual submission idea?
Yeah, well, I think the best example that I can bring to the table is marriage. That's really the nature of biblical marriage. And I've always loved the passage and always played with it pretty much the same way. Wives, submit to your husbands, but a few verses later, husband, wives, as Christ loved the church, he died for the church. It's not a problem to come into submission to somebody that will die for you.
Yeah.
That's not a problem. So I think that would be where I'd try and start. And I think what's happened is, again, I like words. So, the word submission, it's got the word mission in it. And I think what we often do is we think that submission is about a person, whereas actually it's about a mission. And so if I bring myself, as it were, under a mission in shared collaboration, mutual submission, I'm serving a mission. My job is to bring me, what I have to offer, into the mission. And so, in the husband and wife scenario, the husband and the wife should be bringing what they bring into the family, into the marriage, for the mission of the family, of the marriage. And obviously, there are unique roles that each of us bring into the marriage, into the family, and they vary. To some extent, there are some that don't vary, which is your profession. It's OBGYN. There are some things that only women can do. So I think that's the place I'd want to start, is that it's not about a person, it's about a mission.
Wow.
And you've got that in there, which is about, working together to bring health and healing. So I'd want to start there and say we mustn't separate the word submission from the mission, and that we come into submission to a mission, not a person.
Yeah. I think it's interesting too, just even the way that we've interpreted and translated into English what the Apostle Paul and the Apostle Peter, both of them talk about submission and authority. I think 2 Peter 2 and Ephesians 5 are kind of the bigger passages on submitting to authorities. The word that they use in the Greek in both of those passages is not the word submit that means to obey. It's the word that means to serve. Um, and I think when you reorient us to the centerpiece being to serve a mission rather than slavish or sycophantic obedience, it completely changes the context for for the word to submit or the word for mutual submission. And I think there's beauty in this, bringing what I have that is my authority and my gift, and I bring it to bear to the overall mission, and I give it to you. I I serve you with it for our mutual good interests. Um, and this is maybe what we mean more by shared authority. We're serving with our authority and with our giftings.
Yeah, absolutely. And even if you think, I mean, let's go into my country here, the UK. We have a prime minister. Now he's obviously the most senior civil servant. Um, but even in that language, he's the first minister. He's the first one to minister to the needs of our country, the history of the language that we've used in the places of the greatest authority in the history of Judeo-Christian government is servant, civil servants. So I think we often lose that. So it's interesting that you highlight the word that's used there by Peter and Paul for authority is to serve. And of course, Jesus said, I didn't come, to be served, but to serve. And so I think it has to start there, and then the mutual is the recognition of the gift in each other. It comes from the place that I come into submission to the gift. My interpretation, my language would be the glory, um, that's on your life, and we see that, and I actually think healthcare is an incredible example where you have different specialisms who will work together and will defer to the gift that needs to be literally operating in a particular situation. And I think what we're trying to broaden here is, number one, it has to be relational. And that for me is biblical model of government is relational. So whether it's local, national, global, it has to be relational. And that's when it goes wrong, when the relationships break down. And then it has to be the shared mission that, which is back to, for me, the purpose of government, which is that, the creation of a society where every member of that society is able to make their contribution to the fulfillment of the vision or mission for that society, whether that's a town, a village, or whatever it is. So I think for me, they all overlap. So I'm not as concerned about the submission. Now, obviously, that's when politics goes wrong and you get dictators, and it's like, boy, can I come into submission to that? And that's when, we find the non-negotiables, and that's where the Corrie ten Booms are born, in those environments. But they're not as everyday.
Yeah.
Hopefully don't face those.
Mm.
But I think that would be my approach to that.
Yeah. Well, and I think you pointed out too the recognition of glory in the other. There is the need for us to acknowledge our need for each other. I bring this, but you bring this. And quite frankly, I actually can't administrate an effective practice even without effective relationship with government structures that help to protect and help to resource the things that I'm doing. I rely on that. And yes, there's frustration sometimes when it seems that we don't have shared goals or shared vision for how to get those goals to occur. And in relationship where there's mutual submission, where there's serving and recognizing the expertise and the resources that both parties bring, we actually can have the freedom to challenge mindsets. We can challenge things that aren't going well. But the context for that is I am here to actually serve a shared goal, a shared mission. And it does change how you approach it. I see a lot of health professionals and to some degree, less expertise in the government sphere currently, but health professionals really frustrated and seeing government interference as something that's obstructing their goals and losing sight of how to serve and to maintain a shared vision. I think as stewards on both sides, recognizing we need each other.
Yeah, I mean, it's I mean, absolutely. It's I mean, you could sort of an example that almost it's like we can talk even about the Bible, the great characters of the Bible that we know about, but we know about them because there were other characters who wrote down the detail and created the document. And I think that sense of all being in it together. Some years ago, Ford Motor Company had a, um, a statement. It wasn't either vision or mission. But I loved it, and it was everything we do is driven by you. And
Mhm.
what it said was, the person who opened the cafeteria at 6 in the morning to give the sandwich and the cup of coffee to the staff was building Fords. I think it's that. I think that's the big, if in a town, a city, wherever, the healthcare mandate is is carried by many, many different people who are all playing their part and are serving something bigger than themselves. And I think it's that, and then within that, I'm sure there are immense frustrations. I mean, I read a few of them that I'm sure are extremely frustrating. And we both had a mutual friend who literally had to move because it was so difficult for him to practice his pediatric medicine with the political and other pressures around him. So I know it can get overwhelming, but the real goal is that everyone would work together for the healthcare needs of a community, a society.
And certainly we witnessed recently through the COVID pandemic significant areas of breakdown in this goal throughout the world. I think it was prominent in certain nations more than others. Certainly here in the US, I experienced significant distress because of the breakdown of this mutual care and serving between government and healthcare and the community at large. There were there were narratives that were created around COVID that were very harmful, from multiple perspectives, but certainly harmful, untrue, false, and those narratives guided the way people thought and behaved outside of this construct of serving and honoring one another. And it was very prominent among Christians in this country. That was my experience. That was has been the experience of many healthcare workers. That, in particular, c- professing Christians openly and verbally defied and condemned healthcare workers and community health workers' recommendations and expertise and advice. And it was a great schism in trust that we're still working to rebuild. In the context of thinking about the narrative that we get to live in as dual realm kingdom people, where do you position us in that? How do you look at that?
I mean, sometimes I worry that my links aren't quite what the links that might be in your head as I think about them. But I particularly during the COVID scenario, I met with a lady who was a prophetess who lived next door to a scientist in Oxford, and she said to me, she said the scientists locked themselves away for the weekend and asked the Holy Spirit for the answer, and actually was part of the team that piggybacked the vaccine on an old vaccine, and that she believed that was a revelation from God. And for me, in another era, in another time, that would have been celebrated as the great testimony. So I think some of this is us um, um, learning to be present is the language that I would use um, for other people, which I think is where the mutual submission. Let me give a completely different example. I remember when I worked in a particular prison that had a sex offenders unit, and people would say to me, what are they like? And I'd just say, well, they're just human beings, the same as you and I. You know. But what we do when we distance ourselves is we dehumanize and we demonize. And as soon as we do that, we separate ourselves. And I would use this phrase that is when you sit across the table to do a parole report of a sex offender, you are looking at you almost have to say to yourself, look, there, but by the grace of God, if my life had been different, I could be the other side of the table. And because the presence, stepping into the intimate presence with another human being and seeing the world from their lens. And I think that that's a huge part of collaboration. Um, if recognizing the glory in another for me is honor, that's my definition of honor, is when I recognize and respond to the glory in another. Proverbs is very interesting because it says, um, before uh, dishonor comes pride, and humility comes before honor. That takes me to my definition of honor, which is the recognition and response to the glory in another. And let's just unpack that a little bit more. That each one of us has a glory. We're made in the image of God, and we reveal, reflect, and point to Him. And so, the healthcare professional has a glory because they're practicing medicine out of being made in the image of another. And um, so, where I always go is Proverbs says, before honor comes humility, but pride comes before dishonor. So when we start working together, when we collaborating together, we are recognizing the glory in the different disciplines within the whole range of healthcare professionals. And that's for me is the key. So then what we're moving is we're shifting ourselves, as it were, if you like, to being present with another instead of demonizing or dehumanizing somebody because either we're not present, we're not close enough to them, we don't understand them, we don't know enough about them. We actually move ourselves into uh, a closer relationship with them. And I think, COVID, however we want to work with that, was a classic example is that it was different in different places. And, I talked to healthcare professionals who were genuinely in fear of their lives. And therefore the lengths that they went to protect their lives and their families' lives. You and I both have a friend where a husband and wife lived in separate homes for that season to protect their families. It was very, very real. And so it is that thing I think about being present, allowing ourselves to be present with other people to understand where they're coming from in this world of mutual collaboration, coming into submission to a greater mission and walking hand in hand with people who discipline we don't understand, but choosing to learn where they're coming from.
Yeah. I mean, I think too that was an exercise in learning for me during COVID. And the phrase that I would come up with to describe what I needed to do and what I needed other people to do for me was to come around to the other side of the room. Let me come and stand with you and look at this from your side of the room because it does look different from your side of the room. The part that you're seeing looks different than the part that I'm seeing. And I think it was troubling and difficult to face the open pride that we all had. I said we because it was all of us that we had about our side of the room perspective that we were experts on. And I would face it just in simple things like patients in my waiting room being very, very upset that we were asking them to wear a mask while they were within our practice setting and sometimes so upset that they were really truly incredibly rude and aggressive, and some of these were my fellow church members, and I would come out to the waiting room because I was I was hearing the kerfuffle, and I would come and I would stand with them, and I would try to draw them into that kind of perspective. And I would also try to take a step toward them too, which is what does this look like from your perspective? And what are you seeing and believing that makes you so upset right now that we're asking this of you? And and a lot of times I would hear things that sounded very untrue to me. I would hear them tell me about their expertise, about the story that they were believing that nobody's dying from this. This is all made up. And and so I think that was really troubling to hear, but if I took a step toward them and 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 actually told them my experience and the story that I was experiencing, "Hey, I actually just came from the hospital a few hours ago where we have a pregnant patient on a ventilator with COVID, and it's very scary, and we don't know if she's gonna make it. She's in your community right here, my patient. This is actually happening." And I would just love it if you could humble yourself to consider that this could help me take care of our community if you would be willing to do this for a few minutes with us. And that kind of mutual perspective sharing of honoring the expertise and the experience of each other is very significant. Hey, Healthcare Tribe, I hope that you have been impacted by what I've brought through this podcast. I also want you to know about opportunities to give back through my nonprofit, Selah Health International. We work to support projects for women and children of vulnerable populations around the world. You can learn more and donate on our website, selahhealthinternational.org.
Yeah, I think I'm not sure which one of us started the piece about narratives, and then I'm also sometimes not all that sure about whether or not um, how we kind of get to this piece. But in my brain, the real question is the dominant narrative. And I think what for me has happened is that we've created a world where people can develop a dominant narrative because they've removed themselves from the narratives that are about that are bigger than themselves, and they've reduced the
Yeah.
narrative down to it's now and it's me, and they've removed themselves from the bigger narrative, and all of the narrative about me and taking care of me, which is very much a part of our current world, has become a much bigger subject. There's nothing wrong with that until it becomes the first narrative that I look through everything at. And I think that was some of the problem, and remains some of the problem. I actually, I was driving someone this morning. I said, "So just text me these words. He has put eternity in our hearts." And it was because
Mm.
it was about this narrative of time. And when we remove ourselves from time, um, we remove ourselves from the very small place that in all of eternity we occupy. Um, and and we end up with it's me and it's now. And so I think learning, hopefully we all learn a lot through But we do live in a world with with the individual the nationalism, the consumerism, even the uh, salvation by therapy sort of world. These are all narratives, and they have a piece of truth in them. But when they become the first narrative through which I see, then I become the angry patient
Mm.
in your waiting room. And so
Wow.
I think it's and that's what we've got. And then of course we've got our social media world, which and populism, which is driving so much of our politics as well. And then if we couple that, it feels that ages ago I started talking about this, but our loss of respect for authority. It's speeded up so fast. It's scary. I always say when I was a kid, I recognized the authority of the bus driver. You know, we've lost that a long time ago. The respect for authority and, police, law enforcement, and of course in healthcare, as we're talking about now. Um, and so many people like yourself are having to restore people's trust in you, people's respect for your authority, because you're trained, you've practiced, you've got experience and stories. So I think we are in you've rightly called it restore. Part of the restore is to restore the respect for healthcare professionals. Whereas we wouldn't, 100 years ago, if we walked into the doctor, we'd have done what they said. Now we've got an armful of what we just learned on the internet, and we're going to tell
Yes, our
a trained
research.
doctor that we know better.
Yeah. Well, I think your argument could also be shifted to us as health professionals as well. And a place I find many clinicians right now is just tremendous frustration and anger, maybe even about how disrespected or dishonored they are in our current societies or by current governmental and health department approaches. And I think there too what you say applies because I think we could inadvertently get sucked into a narrative that's about us. And again, stepping out of that, it's not about us having honor and us having power and us having authority. There's an eternal perspective on this as well. There's another story we can step back into and find peace again. Because if we make it about us and what we're losing or what is being taken from us, again, we step out of this ability to lean in and come in toward people. We've now stepped into a place where we're territorial and we're trying to maintain our expertise and respect ourselves. And that could be a trap just as much as what we're facing currently in society.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is why the dual realm approach. And it's interesting because there's a dual realm approach, heaven to earth. But in a sense, that dual realm, heaven to earth approach is actually informing the approach of living in these places of tension in community, society, politics, because the ultimate tension is heaven to earth. But then what you're describing is the everyday tension of working with systems and structures and political ideologies that you might not agree with. So in a way that the dual realm is actually the training ground, and saying there isn't a place where you can live this life without tension, but this is the training ground of bringing heaven to earth, of bringing tomorrow into today, about living with in mystery about things we don't understand, that we can then apply to the way we work in the natural with people that we can see, hear, and touch, but we don't agree with. I think a couple of, I wrote some statements about what I call translating kingdom, for want of a better title. And I think two of the biggest ones are: disagreement is acceptable, disagreeable is unacceptable. And I think
Wow.
that that steps in, and then the other one is that unity doesn't mean that we agree.
Yeah. Sometimes the best way to love and honor is actually to confront and expose things that aren't truth or aren't light.
I,
But there's a way to do it.
yeah, so I think that's really what you're touching on with this, and it's these are the real difficulties of living and working in this fallen and broken world. We're back to the last podcast when we talked about, justice is to heal a broken world, and the healthcare professional is at the front line of healing. And therefore, you're at the front line of justice, which means that you're going to be at the front line of not just injustice, but you're going to be at the front line of people's opinions of what justice looks like. So that becomes, because justice then becomes, well, my rights justice. I have a right to not do what the government tells me to do. And I mean, it's a very, we live in a melting pot or a boiling pot or something, don't we?
I mean, I think about the example of the early church because certainly if you want to claim that our current societies have the most evil governments ever, I think that would be probably false because I think the Roman Empire could easily usurp that title very, very readily. And yet the early church grew, thrived, and absolutely transformed global society over the course of several hundred years, granted, um, in a way that probably would have boggled the minds of the disciples who thought Jesus had come to create a new empire. And and the way that God chose to do that with the early Christians continues to confound and challenge me. The way that they loved and served and yet stood up and did sometimes walk in civil disobedience by preaching the gospel when they shouldn't have. But they yet also served the communities that they were in. Some of the moments where the gospel spread the most widely were when there was great disaster that the Christians could actually serve the people when the Justinian plague happened and Christians took in the plague victims and showed compassion and mercy. Um, it is it possible that in dual realm we could serve and honor evil, misguided governments, programs?
Yeah, and I think it almost boils down to, do we believe that in our faith we have the answers, that in our Jesus, that he gave us the way to live or not? And I was playing around this morning with the parable, the narratives of the parable. And you've just basically, in a completely different way, you know identified the Good Samaritan. It's like, everyone's gonna it's almost like on the migrant boat. We're turning around the migrant boat. We're saying you don't belong here, but there's a woman on there who's just about to give birth, and in steps a Dr. Jen Kang or her lookalike in this land, and delivers the baby, because that's what the parables would tell us to do. The parables wouldn't say us by. And so I was just, I think it does boil down to, do we or do we not believe that 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 our faith, and in particular Jesus, gave us the values of how to live. And I was looking at the Beatitudes as well, and I started to read them through a slightly different lens. I thought, maybe the first statement is what Jesus values, and maybe the second half of the statement is what he came to see happen. So, you end up with blessed are the poor in spirit, for they shall inherit. It's like, well, what he's saying is, I value that, and that's what I came to see established on earth. And I think it's do we or don't we believe? So I ended up running through, the parables are about the kingdom of God. They're about grace and mercy. They're about judgment and accountability. They're about reverse of expectations and so on. We have the answer. And we have the answer to govern. We have the answer to for justice. We have the answer for society. And, even with what I've been teaching profession and professionals, I realize that it's not so much erasing the secular sacred divide, it's actually going back. We've got all this in our history. You know that your education, science, theology, medicine, it's in our history. It all came from the same place. And so it's more about restoring than it is about starting something new.
Yes. And almost like uncovering and rediscovering what Christ already established.
Yeah, I think if we take, I don't know whether it fits in here. I'm sure it does somehow, but if we take the challenges with transgender and those, very, very hot topic potatoes. But if we could just stop for a moment and realize that actually the person presenting with that problem is not the problem. The real problem is the narrative that they found themselves living in and being told is okay. So what we have to do is we have to rewrite the creator's narrative of design, of image, of identity and purpose. We have to rewrite that for a future generation. And while that narrative is being reestablished through revival, reformation, restoration, we have to take care of the person who is actually the victim of the narrative that they were unfortunate enough to find themselves living on planet Earth for, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Whereas what we tend to do is we go like the immigration problem. It's a real problem. I get it. It's a real problem. Those people they're the victims of a world of extreme globalization and the effect of the internet. This it's completely rattled the way we do life. So I think your example is this. It's like the doctor who rushes into the prison that I'm running to resuscitate the prisoner that's just tried to kill themselves. It will be very easy to stand and look at go that, well, they're a criminal, they're a less than, it's their fault. No, they're made in the image of God. And they're worthy of the doctor running in, or as it was in one situation, me cutting the person down and giving mouth to mouth resuscitation. It's like, the people out there, people who are distant from that. But the parables tell us how to behave. The Beatitudes tell us what he values. The man Jesus says, I came to seek and to save the lost. I came to serve, not to be served. We've been given the answers. We have to steward those answers and those values in a broken and fallen world. And you guys are incredible examples of that because you carry this mandate to bring health and healing, and you're surrounded by politics, administration and governments and conflicts and opinions and an internet that seems to have given people the belief that they know better than you. And in the middle of that, you are stewarding this most beautiful mandate that you've been given.
And what a privilege and what an incredible power to hold. And we do believe that Christ has come into the world to bring all of the answers and all of the compassion and all of the power of a good father into this one. And wow, what an incredible role that we get to play to partner with that. And then if that's the context in which we're rooted, that's the story that we're rooted in, it changes how everything looks to us. It changes how we respond, and it changes how it affects us as well. Such an interesting conversation, Paul. I know we could go on and on this, but the treasures and the tidbits that you've shared already, I think will leave a lot for us to digest. I think looking at the Beatitudes could also be a really incredible secret for frustrated health professionals right now to get back into the story in which they belong and in which they can function with power and with peace in this chaotic, seemingly chaotic political environment. Thank you for sharing with us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for letting me just roll with some crazy ideas, and see where they land. But yeah, it's my privilege.
We love it. So good. Thanks for being with us. I'm Dr. Jennifer Kang, and this is the Restore Healthcare Project. Healthcare professionals, I'm so excited to be able to connect with you on issues regarding spiritual needs in healthcare. We want to partner together to see some of the ruined places of healthcare culture restored by hope. Follow us at restorehealthcareproject.org and like and subscribe to our YouTube channel and social media.